Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Uplevel Your Life with Mindy. I'm your host, Mindy Duff, and I am going to be chatting with a guest today, and we're going to be discussing overeating and cravings and all kinds of things that I know a lot of us have some kind of experience with to whatever degree. Maybe it might be different from person to person, but I'm going to be chatting with Glenn Livingston, and I just want to tell you a little bit about him first here. Glenn Livingston is a PhD, was the longtime CEO of a multi-million-dollar consulting firm, which has serviced several Fortune 500 clients in the food industry. Glenn has sold $30 million of marketing consulting services over the course of his career. And you may have seen some of his or his company's previous work, theories, and research in major periodicals like the New York Times, Los Angeles Times, Chicago Sun-Times, Indiana Star-Ledger, the New York Daily News, American Demographics, or any of the other major media outlets that you might even think of. Pretty much you've probably seen his work, whether you knew it or not, to be honest. So Glenn was disillusioned by what traditional psychology had to offer overweight and or food obsessed individuals. And so he spent several decades researching the nature of binging and overeating via work with his own clients and a self-funded research program with more than 40,000 participants. Most important, however, was his own personal journey out of obesity and food prison to a normal, healthy weight and to a much more lighthearted relationship with food. Glenn, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me. I've got to take you around to parties and have you introduce me. That was lovely. Thank you.
You bet. So I'd like to just start with the beginning of your story. Now, in your intro there, I mentioned many wonderful things that you've been doing, but how did you get to this point? What started this journey with food, basically?
I like to say that I lost a war with a chocolate bar in 1982 and I didn't wake up for about 20 years. It's a nice way of saying that I had a problem. I was, I'm 6'4", and just genetically, I'm kind of lucky. I'm a little broad-shouldered and, modestly muscular. And when I was a kid, if I worked out for a couple hours a day, it didn't matter what I ate. I mean, I could have 6,000 calories a day, no problem. A whole pizza, box of muffins, box of chocolate bars. It didn't matter. I mean, it did. I was spending too much time sleeping it off. But when you're a kid, you don't care about that. But I loved it. I thought it was great. And as I got a little older, I was married young at 22, and my metabolism slowed down, and I had to commute 2 hours each way to go to graduate school. And we were running a business together. The business was hers originally. We were running the business together, and so I didn't have 2 minutes a day to work out, much less 2 hours. And I found that the food still had a hold on me. I would be, sitting with a suicidal patient and thinking, when can I get the next pizza? I never lost anybody, thank goodness. And, thank goodness I overcame this. But, I wasn't 100% present. And that actually bothered me more than the weight or, the physical effects of the food itself. Because I come from a family of 17 psychotherapists. And, something breaks in the house, we all know how to ask it how it feels, and nobody really knows how to fix it. It's a joke, but when you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And so when I tried to fix this for myself, I made the assumption that I must have a metaphorical hole in my heart. And if I could fill that hole in my heart, then I wouldn't have to keep trying to fill the hole in my stomach. And so I went to, the best psychologists in and around New York City because we knew them. We were, in that crowd. And I confessed my soul, and I, cried and I screamed and I told stories, and I went on a spiritual journey in Overeaters Anonymous, and I took medication for a little while. I went to see dietitians and nutritionists, and everything I did would enrich me as a person, and it would make me lose a little bit of weight, and then I gained a whole bunch back. And the obsession got worse and worse and worse. So there was something that just wasn't working. Over the course, I'm really condensing things quite a lot. I've got more stories if you want to go into it. But over the course of about 20 years of that type of a journey, I I had three things that flipped my paradigm about how to approach food, from nurture your inner wounded child, back to health, or not try to love yourself thin, to something more like, be the alpha wolf of your own mind. But when the alpha wolf is challenged for leadership, it doesn't say, "Oh my goodness, someone needs a hug," right? It
Right.
growls and it snarls and says, "Get back in line or I'll kill you." Like it asserts its superiority. And I realized that I should be able to assert my superiority over these biological urges in the same way that I could assert my superiority over other biological urges. Like you see a pretty woman on the street, you don't just go run up and kiss them. You have to go urinate while you're in a meeting. I would say, "I'm sorry, but I'm talking to Mindy now. You're going to have to wait." Right? Like I'm in charge, not my biology, to a certain extent. I mean, if
Right.
I decided not to pee for 12 hours, my bladder would tell me otherwise, but or
Right.
maybe in 4 or 5 hours at this age. But the three things that flipped that paradigm were that I was doing a lot of consulting for the food industry. I was on the wrong side of the war. I'm actually trying to make up for it now. I feel guilty about what I did, but I was making a lot of money, helping to sell sugars and packages and containers and things. And what I saw there was that they were engineering these hyperpalatable concentrations of starch and sugar and fat and salt and excitotoxins. And it was all geared to hit the bliss point of your reptilian brain. They spent a lot of time talking about bliss points, without giving you the nutrition to feel satisfied. And the reptilian brain doesn't know love. The reptilian brain looks at something in the environment and says, this is the reptilian brain. It says, "Do I eat it? Do I mate with it? Or do I kill it?" It's like a bad college drinking game. It doesn't know love. It's the mammalian brain on top of that says, before you eat, mate, or kill that thing, what impact does that have on your tribe, on your family, on the people that you love? And the neocortex says, on top of that, what impact will that have on your long-term goals, like health and fitness and weight loss, and also spirituality and art and music and work and contribution? But this thing here doesn't know love. So I said, okay, so there's this external force. They're spending tens of millions of dollars to engineer these crazy foods. And it has nothing, which is geared towards my reptilian brain, which is all about feast or famine, fight or flee, eat, mate, or kill. It doesn't know love. Why am I trying to love myself then again? Why is that going to work? I saw the advertising industry and how they were stellar at leveraging plausible deniability. These potato chips have avocado oil in them, and they have a big avocado star in it. And then, does anybody really think that avocado, and potato chips with avocado oil are good for you? Does anybody really think there's a lot of nutrition in a potato chip? We eat potato chips. I mean, it's fine if you want to have them, but you don't do it because you think you're getting a nutritious lunch. It's a potato chip, right? But all the rational brain needs is a sliver of an excuse to justify what the reptilian brain wants to do. And the reptilian brain is geared to push the rational brain out of the way when it perceives a scarce food opportunity. And 100,000 years ago, when all of these brain structures were evolving, the ability to acquire that many calories in such a small space for so little effort just didn't exist. And so the reptilian brain goes, wow, and it just lights up and it's got to have it, because I can walk downstairs to a convenience store and buy 10,000 calories for $100 and walk across the street and do the next thing. So this is a very powerful external force. It has nothing to do with whether my mama didn't love me enough or she dropped me on my head or was in a bad marriage or anything like that, which I was. And I kind of put together eventually, I was reading some alternative addiction treatment literature. Oh, and then finally I did that study. I intercepted people on the internet when clicks were cheap, and I got 40,000 people to take a survey, which was essentially about what they were stressed about and what foods they struggled to stop overeating when they were stressed. And there were three things that came out of that study, one of which I thought was going to be my answer, but it wasn't. The three things that came out of that were people that struggled with chocolate, and my binges always started with chocolate. It's just one bite. It's not going to hurt you. You can start tomorrow. just one bite of chocolate at the coffee place. That's always what it started with. Then it was the, pizza to kind of alternate from sweet to salty, and on and on and on. But I always started with chocolate, and it turned out that people who struggled with chocolate, they tended to be lonely, brokenhearted, or a little depressed. People that struggled with soft, chewy, carby things like, bagels and bread and pasta and pizza, they tended to be stressed at home. And people who struggled with crunchy, salty things like, chips and pretzels, they tended to be stressed at work. And I thought this was this brilliant finding, and I thought this was going to be the answer. And all I have to do is figure out how to fix my marriage or stop being so, lonely or depressed, and then I wasn't going to have. So I called my mom, who was also a psychotherapist. She's since passed, but she was alive back then. And I said, Mom, I have these really interesting things, especially about chocolate, because you and I, we both go to chocolate. What do you think that's about? How did this pattern start, when I was little? Why do I go to chocolate when I feel, lonely or, depressed or something? And she got this horrific look on her face. This is kind of the moment that I really switched the paradigm. She got this horrific look on her face, and she said, "Oh, honey, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." I said, Mom, it's okay. I love you. I forgive you. This was, 40 years ago. This was a long time ago. This was, 1965. I don't care. I just really want to know. I'm trying to figure this out. She said, well, honey, when you were 1 year old in 1965, 1966, I had your dad and I were really worried that they were going to send him to Vietnam. He was a captain in the army, and we're really worried about it. And I was frightened I was going to be an army widow because we were trying to get pregnant with your sister. And at the same time, my father, your grandfather, had just gotten out of prison, and he was guilty. I'd idolized him my whole life, but he was guilty. And I didn't know, and just like my world came apart. And so half the time when you were coming running over to me for food or love or to play, I just didn't have the wherewithal to give it to you because I was sitting and, staring at the wall. I was anxious and depressed. So what I did is I got a big bottle of chocolate Bosco syrup, and I kept it in a refrigerator on the floor. And I'd say, honey, go get your Bosco. And you'd go crawling over to the refrigerator, and I don't know if I did this when I was 1, maybe I was 2. You go crawling over to the refrigerator, and you take the chocolate Bosco out, and you'd suck on the bottle, and you go into a chocolate sugar coma, and I could resume staring at the wall. And, Mindy, if this were a movie, that would have been the cure, right? If this was a movie, we'd have a big hug and a big cry, and that would be it. I'd never have trouble with chocolate again. What happened instead was kind of crazy. I actually got worse with chocolate. I mean, it was a great conversation to have. I hated myself less. I had more compassion for myself. I had all kinds of compassion for my mom and what she was going through. I got to ask her all kinds. It was a very healing conversation. So I don't regret having that conversation. But there was this crazy voice in my head. I'm not schizophrenic, but there was this voice of justification that we all live with. And it said, you know what, Glenn, you're right. Our mama didn't love us enough, and she left a great big chocolate-sized hole in your heart. And until you could fix the marriage or find love in your life, you're going to have to go right on binging on chocolate. Yippee, let's go get more. Right?
Yep.
And I said, that's interesting. That may be the problem. It's like if the emotional conflict was a fire, maybe this thing in my head is poking holes in the fireplace. Maybe that's that's happening. Maybe if I could fix the fireplace and stop this thing from doing what it's doing, then I wouldn't have such a problem. Because if you think about it, a roaring fire in a well-contained fireplace is an asset, not a liability, right? People gather around and they tell stories and they laugh and they cry and they hug. They make memories. It's an asset. It's only when holes in the fireplace let ashes get out that it can burn down the house. So I did something kind of crazy, and I was not going to teach this. This was not a professional endeavor. I was a child and family psychologist, and I was a marketing researcher. I had a dual career. So it's kind of odd that I wound up, being the guy that teaches this. But at the time, this was a very private thing. It's a little embarrassing for a sophisticated psychologist like me what I did that actually worked. But here's what I did, and you don't have to do it the same way. I decided to call my reptilian brain my inner pig. I know it's a little crazy, but this is my inner pig. And I drew a line in the sand. I said, I'm going to have to know when this thing is active. So I need a rule, like a kind of a tripwire to wake me up when this thing gets active. So I said, I'm never going to have chocolate during the week again. I'll only ever have it on the weekend and no more than 2 ounces. And that way, if I'm in a coffee shop and I'm waiting in line with my latte to pay for it, and there's a chocolate bar at the counter, and I hear this voice inside that says, hey, that looks good, and you could start your silly diet tomorrow. It'll be just as easy. I would say, whoa, wait a minute. That's not me. That's my inner pig. Chocolate on a Wednesday is pig slop. It's squealing for pig slop. I don't eat pig slop. I don't let farm animals tell me what to do. Stupid, right? Like stupid and crude. But it kind of sort of worked. It wasn't a miracle, but I found it wasn't so mysterious anymore. I didn't feel like I had this chronic progressive problem inside. I wasn't puzzled by what was happening. And it would give me those extra microseconds at the moment of impulse where I could make a better decision if I wanted to. There turned out to be a lot more to it. Like once I was starting to wake up, I would work to disempower that justification. So for example, it's not just as easy to start your rule over tomorrow, because if you have a craving and you think I'll just start tomorrow, and then you reinforce the craving and the thought by eating the chocolate then, because our brain is always looking to repeat the things that led to calorie acquisition, then you're going to be more likely to have that thought tomorrow. You're more likely to say start tomorrow, and you're going to be you're going to have a deeper craving tomorrow. So if you're in a hole, stop digging, always use the present moment to be healthy, right? So it was things like that. It would say one bite doesn't matter, and I would say one bite is a tragedy because it's the difference between who's in charge, you or me. And I want to be the master of my own body and the master of my own fate. I don't want to be your BIATCH. I'm not here to be your slave, Mr. Pig. So I had these crazy conversations with my pig. I kept a journal about it for a long time. And over the course of a couple of years, that's how I got better. There were a couple of other things that happened. I figured out that there were authentic biological needs underneath the cravings. So I started experimenting with different types of smoothies when I had the chocolate craving. And I found that if I had a kale banana or a kale juice and banana smoothie, that it didn't feel as good as eating the chocolate would, but I didn't have the crash either. And I didn't crave more and more and more and more, like kind of scratch the itch. And so I settled for being content rather than getting high with food, getting high with chocolate. There are a bunch of other things that happened, but essentially for about 8 years, this was a private thing. And I didn't lose the weight all at once. I was almost about 300 pounds, and I came down about 80 pounds, but in stages, and I had to experiment with different types of rules and different types of foods. But I fixed the problem. I fixed the problem for myself. Okay, 2015, I'm getting divorced. And I was kind of entangled. It was, my ex-wife's business also. And we were doing some other things, but they were all entangled. And I said, I'm going to have to reinvent myself completely. And I was a minor part of a publishing company because of some of the business dealings that I had. And I called the CEO and I'm talking to him. And he said, we need to write our own book so we can do the kind of marketing experiments we want to do to prove that we know what we're doing. And that way we could attract better authors. Do you think you could write a book? And I said, that's as good an idea as any. I said, I have this crazy journal of me versus my inner pig that I kept for 8 years. He says, I love it. Write me a book. So I take that summer and I write the book. I send it to him. 2 weeks later, he calls me back and he says, Glenn, don't answer pig slop. I don't eat pig slop. I don't let farm animals tell me what to do. He proceeds to lose about 90 pounds over the next 18 months. Along the way, we published the book. I start doing some of these podcasts and appearances. We know what we're doing in marketing, but I had no idea how much it was going to take off. And wound up with over 1 million readers. I got a gig on Psychology Today writing for them. Got another 1 million readers there. And now people, they don't quite recognize me by name. But sometimes in a bookstore, they'll look at me and go, you're the pig guy, aren't you the pig guy? So I've subsequently softened it quite a bit. You can call it a food monster or, your inner brat or whatever you want to call it. But Yeah, that's how I recovered. It's a long answer to what's your story, Glenn, but that's what happened.
Oh no, that's the perfect answer, because that's the true answer. And what a fascinating story that you have. I mean, and that's part of why, you're here today, and your story is so relatable to people. Even if somebody, maybe you're not 100 pounds overweight, maybe you're not even 50 pounds overweight, but we all have that moment where, do I eat the brownie? Do I not eat the brownie?
Mhm.
Just eat the brownie, right? And that's why I think this is so
Screw it,
important.
screw it, just do it. Yeah.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Like, oh, I haven't had one for a while. We're great at making excuses for ourselves, and then it just spirals.
Remind me about that. I'll tell you what causes that. But go
Yeah.
ahead.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, tell me right now, because I'll forget.
Well, so if you think about it, I got better largely by fixing my thinking, right? I had all these justifications and so I had a tripwire. That was one part of it. So it would wake me up when the reptilian brain was getting active. And then I fixed my thinking. There were about 30 different excuses I was using, and I managed to disempower all of them eventually. Um, when when I published the book and it got so popular, we wound up developing a coaching agency. And over the course of the next 8 years, we worked with almost 2,000 people. We being not just myself and the groups that I was running, but also and individuals. But I wound up with about 10 coaches that worked with me. And so we were really in a unique position to study this, I think, more so than just about anybody else. And when we started doing long-term follow-ups to figure out what happened at the 6-month mark, 1 year mark, 2 year marks, we find at the 1 month mark, if people would engage with their program and the coaches, a lot of people pay for programs and they don't do anything, but if they would engage with us, the average reduction in overeating was 89.4%. Like we really figured out how to fix your thinking quickly. What that does is it makes it uncomfortable to cheat. There's a phenomenon called cognitive dissonance, which means that we don't like to observe ourselves doing things contrary to what we committed to. We're very involved with um, identity and seeing ourselves as the kind of person who. So if I say I'm never going to have chocolate on a weekday again, I'm really saying I've made a decision to become the kind of person who doesn't eat chocolate on a weekend and on a weekday. And if I see myself acting contrary to that, it not only makes me feel bad about myself for that moment, but it weakens my confidence that I can keep my own commitments in other ways. So it creates a kind of discomfort that your brain, for most people, want to resolve. When I did the long-term follow-ups and I talked to people at the 6-month or the 1 year mark, or did a survey with almost 800 people. Not all of them were long-term people. But what we found was that it didn't really just drop to 55 or 60%, sometimes a little lower. It was bimodal, meaning that there was a group of people who were basically back to where they started from at like 20%. And there was a group of people who were still up around 80, 85%. And the central difference between them was that some people decided to stop doing the techniques. They just decided to stop using it. And I said, well, what's causing that? When I would talk to people about those experiences, they'd say, Doc, I got to the point where I would say, I don't have any excuses anymore. You took away all my excuses. That was great. But eventually I say, oh, well, what the hell? I just really, really want to. Screw it, just do it. What's causing that? I mean, look at me as compared to what I look like, 20 years ago. Look at my life. Like, why would you do that? Well, it turns out that there's a perfectly good reason for it. The reptilian brain is equipped to push aside the rational brain. Most of the time, the rational brain has priority. But in a moment of perceived emergency or perceived scarce opportunity, the reptilian brain has the ability to push aside the rational brain and say, no, we're just going for it. That's why you get the just hand over the chocolate and nobody gets hurt kind of phenomenon, right? So whenever people experience a certain level of organismic distress, which they know colloquially as stress, they're more likely to experience that. And so when we look into what's actually causing that, there are a number of interesting things. The first one is nutrition. It's the hardest one to change. get people to change. So I focus on some of the other things. And I like to tell people, you can defeat your cravings eating what you love. You really can. Two out of three people, at least, most people can do that. So I don't focus too hard on changing people's nutrition as long as they're eating reliably. But people that were experiencing this screw it, just do it moment, they were skipping meals. They were trying some, fasting craze or something like that. When they recounted exactly what happened, they usually had eaten something kind of funky the last meal that they ate before, so they didn't really get enough nutrition the day before because they overeat, and then they're trying to skip a meal to make up for it. The brain can only take so much. Not enough nutrition. Where's my food? Wait, am I in a feast and famine environment? As soon as food's available, I better hoard it. Screw it, just do it. Right? This is a perceived emergency. So, one thing you can take away from that is that if you want to overcome that response, if you want to stick to your plan, you can regularly, reliably nutrify yourself at a slight caloric deficit if you need to lose weight. Don't try to make up for a day of overeating with a day of crazy eating. Make up for a day of overeating with a week of normal eating. It just works a lot better. Okay, but I had a hard time getting people to do that. So I said, what else is causing this form of organismic distress, and how can we regulate it? It turns out that willpower is the ability to make good decisions, and we're only equipped to make so many good decisions over the course of a day. There's a lot of work by a researcher named Baumeister that looks into concludes largely that willpower is more like gas in the tank than a genetic muscle that we have. And you make better decisions in the morning. So, by the way, if you struggle with overeating at night, you want to make your eating decisions in the morning if you can. But it's not just food decisions that wear us down. It's who's taking Jenny to soccer practice, and what do I do with this email 42,000 times a day? Do I spam it? Do I reply to it? Do I defer it? Do I delegate it? Decisions, they're not natural, and they wear you down over the course of the day. So we found that if we could get people to take 2 5 or 10-minute breaks away from decisions entirely, turn off the computer, turn off your phone, go to the bathroom and hide if you have to, but 10 minutes, 5 minutes if you can't make 10 minutes, twice a day, it makes a difference because your brain will restore. Okay. Similarly, we found if people got too fatigued, that the brain was more likely to respond with, we need calories. We don't have enough resources, right? We're trying to do more than this body was meant to do. And so we need more resources to do that. If you don't get enough water, if you find yourself too isolated, we're a tribal animal, we evolved in a social pack, and it was probably dangerous for us if we became isolated from the tribe. And for that reason, we're more likely to perceive an emergency if we feel too alone. Now, that doesn't mean you have to be a social butterfly, because about half the world are introverted. And I'm actually introverted. It doesn't seem like that on these calls, but I have to force myself to do this kind of thing. What it means is that you have to have confidence in your social network. You need to know that there are people there if you need them. And so if we can get people who are feeling somewhat isolated to work on, going to a class, or you can do it online. It's a little better if you work it out to see people in person. Even sometimes just going to the mall and walking around and knowing that you're not isolated out in the jungle with lions and tigers and bears. Oh my, that kind of thing helps. What did I leave out? Misinterpreting stressful stimuli. So, we can't often do a lot about what happens to us in the world, but we can do a lot about what we think about them. And so a lot of the classic cognitive behavioral techniques and, reframing how you're thinking about stress, that can help you. And so the last book that I wrote, which is not the most popular one, but it's the best. It's got all of the scientific evidence. It's got all of these updated things to overcome the screw it, just do it response. It's called Defeat Your Cravings. and it really focuses on more of a dual approach. We see fixing your thinking now. I used to think it was the whole problem, but now I see it as a necessary but not sufficient element of overcoming cravings. The other piece is managing organismic distress. And actually, the third half, I left out of half. The third half has to do with understanding how scientifically understanding how the extinction curve works. How does the brain, why do we have cravings in the first place, and how does it extinguish cravings when it needs to? I could talk about that next, but I feel like I'm talking a lot and you must have questions, so I'm going to be quiet for a moment.
No, this is wonderful. I think it's really interesting, and maybe this is just me because, Glenn, I don't know if you know, I have a background as a holistic health and nutrition coach myself.
Oh,
So
oh,
some of what you're talking about, I'm like, yes, because I feel like not enough people are talking about the science behind it. And some people go, I don't care about the science behind it. But yet, if you don't have some kind of working knowledge of it, it's going to be, to me, that much harder to overcome. So when you can understand, like you're talking about that reptilian brain, when you can understand that that's where this is coming from, first of all, it takes some of the pressure off of yourself. Like, okay, I'm not a horrible person. There's a biological reason why this is happening, and then you can catch it easier. I think with any kind of change we're trying to make in our lives, awareness is always the first step. It's annoying, but it has to happen. If you don't have the awareness of, what's coming before B, you have to know what A is first. Then you can kind of control what happens after
and
that.
I write in a very practical way. I'm not really writing for academia. I'm writing for the masses, and I can explain, I can explain the scientific part in plain English if you'd like.
Yeah,
Should
yeah.
I do that?
Let's do.
Okay. So the most important thing to understand is that, well, even before that, the real most important thing to understand is that cravings are not a sign of a diseased mind. It's not a sign of being a horrible person. We live in a world where everybody tacitly encourages each other to slowly kill themselves with food, and then we shame people when they have struggles with it. But the truth is that strong cravings are a sign of a strong mind. 100,000 years ago, when our physiology evolved, our cravings were what kept us alive. You see, food was pretty scarce, and you had to work to get it. So if you were not incredibly motivated to follow cues that led to the acquisition of calories and nutrition, you were going to starve. It was the ancestors who had the stronger cravings that were more likely to survive. So that's the first thing you got to get into your head. If you have strong cravings, you're not a sicko, you're actually healthier than other people. Unfortunately, in the modern food environment, it's a problem. But physiologically, you're not a sicko. The second thing is that the brain creates and extinguishes cravings via the same mechanism. So it's not really possible, unless you have lesions in your ventromedial hypothalamus or some kind of real, brain injury or brain disease. Unless you have a verifiable disease like that, it's not really possible for someone to be broken physiologically, where they have to eat all these donuts and they can't do anything about it. It's not really physiologically possible to do that. So it's the wrong message that our culture sends about that. Okay, so now that you know you're not a sicko, and that it's actually a sign that your brain is functioning the right way, let's talk about the function of cravings, and most importantly, how do you extinguish them? What happens when you extinguish them? The image I want you to remember is that most people think that cravings go down in a straight line when you remove the reward. So I'm passing a donut shop on the way home every day. I stop stopping for donuts. First it's one donut, then it's two, then it's four. And they say, this has to go. I will never eat donuts on the way home from work again, right? Or I'll only ever have donuts on a Saturday morning. I'll only ever do that again. So I'm not going to stop on the way home from work. So I go through the first day, and most people think that the hardest part is going to be those first couple of days. And then it's just going to get easier and easier and easier. That's not what happens. And I want to tell you why and the mistakes people make. What actually happens is it goes down a little bit for a little bit of a honeymoon period. And then you have worse cravings than you've ever had. Then your brain goes crazy, and then it starts to come down. And then somewhere around the 21 to 30 day mark, you get a couple of little bumps. Why in the world does that happen? Why do we do that? I'd like you to imagine a caveman 100,000 years ago. Let's call him Thag, Thag, just because I like the name. And imagine that Thag finds a monkey that leads him to a banana tree. And Thag goes, ooh, monkeys equals bananas. Thag's brain will, the next time that he sees a monkey, secrete all this dopamine to get him all motivated and happy to go follow the monkey to another banana tree. So there's this stimulus reward pair. Monkeys equal banana. Get happy. Thag's brain will make him miserable if he doesn't follow the monkey. So it does two things. There's two types of motivation. It'll drop the dopamine level below normal, but then it'll raise it above normal when he does it. That's the mechanism of what happens in a craving. But let's say Thag develops this habit because of the dopamine and the pleasure and the way that cravings work. And he always follows monkeys to banana trees. And Thag's living it up, and his family is fed, and he's happy, and he's got a survival needs met. He's going to pass on his genes to his progeny. Then all of a sudden, it gets to be later in the season, and Thag follows a monkey to a banana tree which doesn't have bananas because the other monkeys got them, or they just got scarce after the season went by. And people wonder, what would Thag's brain do at that point? Most people think Thag's brain will give up and say, well, okay, I guess monkeys don't leave to banana trees anymore. But remember, food was scarce, and so were effective food signals. So a monkey that led you to a banana tree 80% of the time was better than having no monkey at all. A monkey that led you to a banana tree 20% of the time was probably still better than having no monkey at all. So what happens is when you stop rewarding things, it's like you're telling your brain the banana trees are scarce. Like the queue is still there, but you're still passing the donut store, but the reward has become scarce. But it's probably still available. I just have to work harder at it. So the brain goes, where are the F for my bananas? Where are the F for my, excuse my language. I'm abbreviating, but some people get mad. Where are the H in my donuts? Where the H in my, and there's this spike. We call it an extinction burst. Now, what most people do at this point is they make a horrible mistake. They reinforce the craving. They say, I can't take this. This is more torturous than I ever imagined. It's going to be like that forever. I'm just addicted to donuts. It's how it is. I'm powerless. I'm a sicko donut eater. That's just how it is, right? It's not true. You're just at the top of the extinction burst. What you want to do is power through and say you don't have to do anything. Well, there are things you can do to make it more comfortable, but you don't have to do anything. You just have to keep going, and then it'll get better. The other mistake people make is at the bottom. When the brain is just about to label the craving dormant, they think, I've got this. Like, obviously, donuts are not a problem for me. I could have a couple of donuts. No, if you reinforce that cue again, your brain is going to work because the brain does not want to forget about how it acquired calories. Brain never does that. It learned a way to get a boatload of calories for not all that much effort. It's always going to remember that. Please don't shoot the messenger. However, the brain also doesn't want to waste energy. So if it learns that the reward is no longer forthcoming, it will label the craving as dormant, which means it won't bother you anymore unless and until you reinforce it. Okay, so that's how the science of cravings works. There are a couple of other implications of it. One is that it's important to remember that cravings occur in stimulus reward pairs, right? So when I'm passing the donut store, the donut sign was the cue. That's what triggered the craving. If I decide to extinguish that by not going into the donut store, then the donut store sign will no longer trigger the craving. If I go to my dad's house or my mom's house, and they put out donuts, which they like to do most Saturday mornings, and I hadn't been there in a couple of months, and I'm there, I might all of a sudden have a worse craving than I've had in a very long time. That's because I didn't fail. Most people's conclusion is, oh, I failed. I'm going to be tortured forever with these cravings. I can't do it. No, I succeeded in extinguishing the donut store as a cravings trigger. I did not bother to extinguish my father's house or my mother's house. That's very important because people misinterpret and they just think that they're stuck and they keep on going. The last thing is, and this is why it's possible to kill your cravings eating what you love for most people. When you randomly reinforce the cravings when you have them, you're signaling your brain that it has to work harder to go get that reward. So it actually makes it worse. This is why in the behavioral literature, a variable racial random reinforcement schedule, which just means I eat it whenever the frick I think I'm going to have it, right? But it's kind of like what happens with slot machines in Las Vegas, that you don't know when they're going to pay off. It's the most addicting type of reinforcement schedule that there is. The reason those little old ladies are sitting there day in and day out pulling the slot machine because they don't know when it's going to pay off and they want to be there when it is. The same thing happens with your cravings if you randomly reinforce them. However, if you say, I'm only going to have donuts on Saturday mornings when I finish the workout and no more than 4 or no more than 2, whatever you want to do. Your brain is capable of understanding that in the same way that it would understand that the slot machine in Las Vegas only pays off at 10 a.m. Let's say there's one that only pays off at 10 a.m. Very quickly, the casinos would empty on during the week because the slot machines wouldn't be paying off. People would just be showing up on Saturday morning. Without that much time, over the course of that 30 days, your brain will learn that the only time I get donuts is when this very particular, complex combination of stimuli occurs. I worked out, it's Saturday morning, and I'm only going to get to have 2, right? So you can create complex cues like that. And for this reason, you can eat by design. We call it eating by design. You can eat what you love and, still kill your cravings. 1 out of 3 people can't do that for a particular substance. And it's different from substance to substance. There are people that can't have any added sugar. They went too deeply down that road. They just can't. People that can't have flour. Sometimes the people who can't have sugar can have flour. Sometimes the people who can't have sugar and flour, they can have, salted nuts or cheese or other treats. But what you want to remember is that you can try to extinguish it conditionally so you don't have to give it up first. You want to remember all this about the science and put this all together. It's a really powerful package for defeating your cravings and getting to a reasonable weight. It's that was the one that I missed. I'm sorry, I'm a little bit all over the place today. The one that I missed that also causes organismic distress is the attempt to lose weight too quickly. When people get focused on weight loss, that creates a panic reaction in and of itself because it makes them want to starve themselves. And then they say, but I just can't live with myself like this. And it's perceived as an emergency. And that's perceived as organismic distress, which makes you want to eat. So you've got to find a way to love yourself before you arrive, slow and steady. That's why the tagline to the book is the back door to weight loss. Okay, now I've explained the whole thing. Thank you, Mindy. You're such a good listener. You're sitting there with a nice smile and nice eyes, and thank you.
Yeah, no, it's just so interesting. I'm just letting you go because it's just fascinating stuff. And I'm really interested to hear what the listeners have to say about all this because I think it's a totally different way of looking at our cravings.
Are we live? Do we have
we're not live. No, but I always encourage my listeners to reach out after episodes, and this episode is no different. So if you're listening.
Okay, so if you want me to come answer questions, I'm more than happy to do that.
Oh, yeah. But yeah, no, I think this is just so key to really understand what's going on biologically behind these cravings to know then you're going to be able to work around it a little bit more. And I love that idea of letting yourself eat the thing, whatever it is, because I think that most people probably will have more success. And when you're talking about like the slot machines and whatever, my mind goes to social media. That's why like Facebook is so easy to sit there and scroll on. Yep. It's because you're just waiting for there's going to be a good post on here somewhere. I just don't know where, so I just keep scrolling.
Hit after the next.
Yeah.
And randomly available.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the same deal with the food. But when you know if brownies are your thing, and you know that I eat brownies every Saturday afternoon, and then somebody shows up with one on Thursday, it's not so hard to say no because you get brownies. I just don't get them today.
Yeah.
So it just makes it a little easier to say no to that.
Can I give people a practical technique for how to get
Please.
started with this?
Yes.
Because a lot of this is theoretical so far.
Yep.
So what you want to do is come up with one simple rule. Most people that are overeating, they're also good dieters. And so they kind of live on this roller coaster. And the brain perceives that as a feast and famine environment. First, they're dieting, and then, oh my God, food's available. Let's get as much as I can. So you want to step off that roller coaster. The way that we do that, unless there's a medical emergency, and please, I'm not a medical doctor. I just want everybody to know that. I'm not even a dietitian or nutritionist. I'm just really a layperson in this field that's done this for a long time. Come up with one simple rule, something you could and would do that's not going to be too burdensome. The reason you want to do that is that it creates a low bar that you can jump over even when your motivation is low, and you will accumulate successes. And so your brain will stop saying, why can't I stop eating? Why can't I do this? And when you ask those questions, by the way, you're directing your brain to find evidence that you can't. So you want to say, what am I doing right? And how can I build upon that? So a simple rule. I always put my fork down between bites. Or I knew a trucker who said, tell you what, I've got to eat 3 meals a day on the road at fast food places, but I won't go back for seconds. Or I always put my gym clothes out before I go to bed. Or, I won't have chocolate during the week. Come up with a very crystal clear rule, but it's something pretty simple. It's not going to cause you to lose a lot of weight. What it will do is give you a win and make you feel like you're moving in the right direction. Just do that for a week or two, because you're going to trigger the identity function. Character is just what we habitually do at the moment of impulse. And if you see yourself not having chocolate during the week, or not going back for seconds, or putting your gym clothes out before you go to bed, your brain is going to start saying, you know what, I must be the kind of person who puts their gym clothes out before I go to bed. I must be a gym goer. Or I must be the kind of person who cares about my health because I'm not having chocolate during the week, right? One simple rule. Once that's there, that's going to be like a tripwire. Figure out what you want to call your inner food enemy. Your goblin, your food monster. You can call it a pig like I did. And then start listening for the part of you that wants to break the rule. That goblin. It's going to be there. We're setting this up on purpose to bring it into the forefront. So, it will say, oh, come on, one bite's not going to hurt. The moment you hear that, you want to take a deep breath. Breathe in for a count of 7 and out for a count of 11. I'm not going to do it now because it takes a little while, but that's called parasympathetic breathing. And you see this reptilian brain neocortex thing. It's really rooted in the physiology of the whole body. And the reptilian brain functions in the sympathetic nervous system, which is the nervous system that gets us revved up for action. A hungry tiger is chasing us, you're going, right? Whereas the neocortex is what says it's okay to rest and digest and plan and work on our long-term goals. Chill, everything's okay, I have what I need right now. The neocortex allows you to breathe out for longer than you breathe in, because you couldn't do that if a hungry tiger was chasing you, right? You're going. So I think it's called the ventral vagal response. It doesn't really matter what it's called. Your whole being knows that if you're breathing slowly and surely like that, longer out than in, that it's time to relax and chill. There's no immediate danger. It helps put you back in your rational brain. Once you've taken, a breath or 3, then ask yourself, okay, Mr. Pig, okay, Mr. Food Goblin, why should I break my rule and give up on my hopes and dreams right now? I came up with this rule for a reason. I was of sound mind. I had the fortitude to write it down. Why should I give up on those hopes and dreams? And, that's when the pig will say, one bite's not going to hurt, or, just start again tomorrow, or, genetically you're doomed. Your parents were fat. You're always going to be fat. You might as well just go to town. Write it down. Don't keep it in your head. Take out your smartphone, write it on a piece of paper, write it down. write it out in full. Take another breath, another 7-Eleven breath, and then ask yourself, why is it wrong? What's wrong? Well, yes, my parents are heavy, and there is a heavy genetic influence on obesity, but more than half the variance is due to diet and lifestyle factors. And if even if I were even if it's genetically much higher mountain for me to climb to be thin, does that mean I should get as fat as possible? Does that mean I should just binge all the time? So you disempower the logic there. And finally say, why would I be a happier or better person if I didn't listen to my pig right now? Well, if I stayed on my plan, that I can continue to walk in the world as a tall, confident, thin man with a smiling presence, and I can be free of cardiovascular worries and diabetes worries, and I can be a role model for my kids. Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So say what you need to say there, and if you can implement that protocol and that alone, you'll probably find you have more power than you ever thought you did. Some people will say, "Wow, I just clicked my heels 3 times and the nightmare was over." Um, and it's not quite that simple, and there's more work to do. And we've got to attend to the other squeals, and you gotta kind of develop this like a muscle, and you have to deal with all the other organismic distress. But it's kind of a miracle. It's kind of a miracle. Last thing I will say, when you're going through that extinction curve, don't go into battle with a plastic helmet. Arm yourself. So ahead of time, you can say, okay, Peg, what are you going to tell me when I get here? What are all your best reasons for me to give up? You can also say, how am I going to attend more to self-care and self-regulation so I don't experience that organismic distress? Let's say I know this donut thing is a really bad habit. Maybe I'm going to work on getting an extra hour of sleep every day for 30 days. Maybe I'm going to carry, like a big water bottle around with me or something like that, right? Maybe I'm going to make some more social contacts. What else am I going to do to calm my nervous system so I can get through this extinction curve? It's going to be rough. There's no way around it. That's going to be an uncomfortable experience. The brain extinguishes cravings through discomfort, and the only way out is through. You can't extinguish your craving if you don't have a craving. So don't go into battle with a plastic helmet. You can prepare, you can arm yourself, and you can take care of yourself so that you can make it all the way through.
Yeah. Oh, I love all that. Very empowering information, I think. And I hope that people listening recognize that, because this really puts the power back in your hands. Once you can identify these things.
That's the idea.
Glenn's given you these great strategies. You can check out the books for more details and really be prepared to get this thing, meet it head on and overcome these cravings.
May I tell them where they can get a free copy of the book?
Please do.
So the whole book, Defeat Your Cravings, is available at defeatyourcravings.com in Kindle, Nook, or PDF format. So the digital copies are free. We have traditional copies for people that prefer paperback or Audible or hardcover, but there's a traditional charge for that. When you do that, I will give you a couple of more things to help you, kill your cravings on the food that you love. One is a set of recorded coaching sessions that demonstrate the process. I know this sounds kind of cold and abstract, and there's an awful lot of information in theory, and you might be wondering, why does Mindy have on this doctor who's got a pig inside of him? It's just really weird. It's actually a very compassionate, loving process, and you can hear me coach people through it in full-length sessions. This is all free, and take them from feeling confused and hopeless and pessimistic about ever getting a hold of it to feeling optimistic and confident in, and excited in just one session. So I recorded a bunch of those, and that's available for free. And then the last thing I'll give you is a copy of our food plan starter templates. This is a diet agnostic program. As long as you're not trying to starve yourself, as long as you're willing to nutrify yourself at a slight deficit and you kind of resonate with the ideas here, then there are starter templates for, keto versus whole foods versus high carb versus low carb versus point counting versus calorie counting. Personally, after working with 2,000 clients, I'm a plant-based person, but personally, I wish that people would get out of that argument and just get away from all the processed food.
Yeah.
I think that it's much
Same.
easier to, yeah, okay. It's because there's a much bigger difference when you see that, right?
Yes.
Much
Yes.
easier to stop binging when you get, I mean, there are things in these packages that take away your ability to know when you're hungry and full. Like how are you going to eat mindfully if you don't know when you're hungry and full? Like it's just,
Yeah.
so, okay. It's all at defeatyourcravings.com. Click the big blue button, sign up for the free reader bonus list, and we'll get you the free book, the free food plan starter templates, and the free recorded coaching sessions.
Awesome. Oh, what a deal. I'm gonna head over there and get all that stuff myself, even
Good.
though I'm a person that does not have 50 pounds to lose, but I catch myself going for the chocolate chips just like anybody else or whatever, your vice may be. And it's
Well,
great just
Mindy,
to kind of
you
have
know
some.
what?
Go
People
ahead.
tell me that they didn't realize this because they were so focused on the weight, but the worst part of food addiction is not really the weight, it's the food obsession.
Yeah.
It's how much it crowds out all the other thoughts in your mind, and you don't feel like you're present with your kids and your pets and your hobbies and your work, and it's the food obsession,
Yeah.
and that's the bigger relief that we give to people. I mean, people lose weight, but that's
Yeah.
the bigger relief that people are proud of. So you don't have to be 100 pounds overweight to want to do this. You want to be able to eat within your own best judgment.
Yes.
So
Yes.
that's what we do.
Yes. Oh, I love that. Well, Glenn, thank you so much for being a guest today. This was again, just I could do another like 4 episodes and just sit here and let you go and listen to all you have to share.
I hope
So
I hope I wouldn't run out, but I'll take you up on that. Okay.
and everybody else that's listening, like I mentioned earlier, message me or Glenn and let us know what you thought about this. Or if you want to try some of these things and message me in a month or 2 months and tell me how it's going. I'm here for that. I'm super interested in everybody's journeys on up leveling their own lives, whatever area it is, particularly if it has to do with food and nutrition, because that's kind of my thing. So yeah, let me know. And again, Glenn, thank you so much for being on today.
Thank you for having me. Thank you. I'm sorry if I talk quickly. Thank
Oh,
you.
no, you're good.
Yeah.
All right. Well, everybody else, wherever you're at, I hope you're having a fantastic day, and I will catch you on the next one.